Many of us are familiar with inequalities between men and women in America, whether it be decades ago like the right to vote or more current issues like the wage gap. We are taught all about them in history and civics courses, but rarely are we aware of such issues in foreign countries, let alone how they have progressed. Today I will show you how women's roles in Greece have evolved over time. I will start in ancient Greece and work my way up to modern society, examining categories such as education, economic opportunities, general values and beliefs, and political and legal rights. In doing so, I will demonstrate how time has affected women's roles in Greece. To help with your understanding of this topic, I will define a key term, gender role. According to dictionary.com, sex and gender roles are the behaviors, attitudes, and activities expected or common for males and females. Whereas sex roles are essentially biologically determined, gender roles are culturally determined through societal norms of what is acceptable based on one's apparent gender. To begin, I will discuss the differences in education between the sexes in ancient Greece. During this time, there was a tremendous development of schools, most of which were for boys. In fact, the majority of institutions were separated by sex. In the case of the ancient Olympics, there was the Heraea, the first sanctioned women's athletic competition to be held in the stadium at Olympia. All previous competitions were men only. The birth of Greece's education system at Olympia is suggested by the fact that the word for school in ancient Greek is gymnasium. A gymnasium was needed at Olympia in order to train athletes for contests, but it quickly expanded into a place of learning. At such institutions, boys were taught a range of subjects, from music and grammar to geometry and astronomy. Girls, however, were educated at home by the men in the family, except for music and dance lessons, which were taught at specialized schools that focused on entertainment and conversation. At home, they were taught to weave, along with other household chores and physical education. Though young girls' education cannot be done at Olympia, there is some indication of education for women along similar lines. Particularly noteworthy was the early development of choruses for girls and women at the same time that the gymnasium was developing. Those in the chorus would have had to be able to read, or else they would have spent a lot of time memorizing the songs they performed, hence the thought that they would have been subjected to some form of training. These differences in education between men and women led to few economic opportunities for the women of ancient Greece. Women were controlled by men at nearly every stage of their lives, so their main job was to manage the house and bear and raise preferably male children. Following this was spinning, weaving, bread baking, cooking, serving, cleaning, fetching water, and removing wastes. Duties of a rural woman may have included agricultural work like harvesting olives or fruits, but rarely were women involved with other businesses outside of the home. Certain women were also used as conversationalists, entertainers, and prostitutes. These women tended to be slaves. The ancient Greeks knew that slaves that were cared for were more productive, so they treated them as part of the family, though they could still be forced into sex work. Slaves were uneducated, and if they were before they became slaves, they could work for their freedom. Ancient Greece ran on a slave-based economy, with plentiful numbers of female slaves to cook, clean, and carry water from the fountain. Only in the poorest of homes was the wife expected to do these duties herself. Women also may have had limited options in the workforce due to the ancient Greeks' values and beliefs. For example, retrieving water from the local fountain house was considered not only a woman's task, but it also offered her the opportunity to socialize with other women outside of the house, of which she rarely left. When a woman did leave the house, though, it was of great importance. It was a woman's responsibility to visit the tombs of family members and bring offerings. Women were also allowed to attend public speeches and visit certain sanctuaries, but that is about it. And any time a young woman was outside of her home, she was expected to be inconspicuous and covered around the head to obscure most of her face and neck. A garment that would suffice was most likely made herself, as clothes were normally made at home from locally available wood or flax. It is religious rituals that were reserved for young girls, though, that probably had the most significant impact on young unmarried women. For example, girls between the ages of 5 and puberty were selected to serve the goddess Artemis in her sanctuary at Brauron. They acted out the role of untamed animals that would eventually domesticate through marriage. As for marriage itself, that was arranged by the girl's parents, and she would have to bring a dowry. Thus, the self-perception of a young girl was manipulated through their participation in rituals that educated them in the values and morals of their community. It is interesting that, despite all of the restrictions women during this time period faced, they had such powerful female goddesses. Despite having such strong female roles in their belief system, it is still the men that prevailed in real life. Greek women had virtually no political or legal rights of any kind. Before the Trojan War, women were able to vote, but they lost that privilege due to the men's belief that they voted irresponsibly. This again was in part due to the difference in education that women received at the time. Men received a formal education, while women would be educated only if they pursued it. Even then, it was the bare minimum education one could receive. The idea was that women did not need a formal education because they did not need to compete with men. The fallacy of this is that women need to support the work of men, and if they're not educated, they cannot provide support. If women were properly educated at the time, they would not have had the issue of men believing they were voting irresponsibly. The only real thing women were able to do relative to politics and the legal system was serve as a legal representative for men. Fast forward to the 20th century, and a lot has changed. Between the end of World War II and the mid-1980s, more women moved to cities and finished raising their families while still young enough to work, creating a spike in women's participation in the Greek workforce. Come 1977 and 1987, the share of women in the workforce increased from 32 to 43%, with the majority of women working in agriculture, industry, and the service sector, three industries that are still thriving in Greece today. Although there are no legal barriers concerning employment options outside of the home, and Greece's population is split evenly between men and women according to UNICEF, women still do not make up a large percentage of the workforce. It is the rural areas of Greece that are largely responsible for this lopsided statistic because, for the most part, women adhere to their traditional domestic roles, but they are not the only ones. Gender roles, which dictate that women take care of the home and men work outside of the home, are still considered the standard. However, there is no legal basis for this, and the expectation is mainly a traditional one. Many women now work outside of the home, while the men have been playing an increased role with domestic duties. The educational advancement of women paralleled their entry into the workforce in the late 20th century. The division of female university students grew 23% from the 1970s to 1989. Yet, in 1990, Greece had an insufficient number of part-time post-secondary education programs, which affected women more than men. Today, approximately 65% of women have a secondary degree. Although this was a setback, the women in Greece had had many other successes. In 1952, as a result of women's suffrage, women in Greece received the right to vote and are now represented prominently in business sectors and at all levels of government. They were also made eligible to hold public office once they achieved their voting rights. The first woman was elected to the national legislature in 1954. Since then, many women have been elected to that body. Women in Greece are now also able to inherit property equal to that of men. In 1983, the custom of the dowry, which helped the women secure a mate, was legally abolished as well. Though these changes occurred in women's roles, much remained the same in their values and beliefs. The basic prescription for modest virginity before marriage and fidelity and demure behavior after marriage persisted in all of the classes. Women are still taught to restrain sexual impulses because failure to do so would tempt men into improper conduct. This is known as the Madonna-whore complex. First identified by Sigmund Freud, it is the inability to maintain sexual arousal within a committed, loving relationship. The men either view the woman as saintly Madonnas or debased prostitutes. Someone with this psychological complex desire a sexual partner who has been degraded because they cannot desire the respected partner. What is interesting is that, instead of trying to fix the male, it is the woman who is shamed because the man is expected to control his wife. Marriage and motherhood transforms a woman's image from that of a modest virgin to the dominating force in the household and among her children. Her role is still very important in protecting the family's honor. The process of finding a mate has not changed much either. In fact, it becomes even more interesting. Greek men are able to mail-order Greek brides. The men pay thousands of dollars to do so, and give the woman multiple gifts in the process. The websites for such conduct are similar to that of a dating site, though they are more systematic in what happens when you begin talking, with the end goal being marriage. This method is not common, though, as such services are normally used by those who have social issues. In this presentation, I have showed you how the education in Greece between the sexes has balanced out, allowing for more economic opportunities for women, though the country's values and beliefs have not strayed far from their originals, and how perseverance in the feminist movement over the last few decades has allowed women to have equal rights to those of men. Had more time been allowed for this project, I would have liked to analyze how Greece's economic crisis affected women, discuss feminism in Greece in detail, and delve deeper into the Madonna-whore complex. Overall, time has done a great service of enhancing the roles of women in Greece in a variety of ways, but there is still room for improvement.